It was one of those nights when even the walls of the hospital seemed to hold their breath. The fluorescent lights flickered softly over the white corridors of St. Joseph Hospital in Dallas, Texas, sterile, endless, and heavy with silence. Outside, a storm pressed against the windows, its rain whispering like prayer beads falling from heaven. But before we go any further, I want to ask you something that comes from the heart. Are you willing to receive the blessings that the Virgin Mary has lovingly prepared for you? If your answer is yes, write in the comments, "Yes, I am ready for Mary's miracles." And if you haven't yet joined our family, subscribe now, because here, each day, we witness the tender love and mighty power of the Mother of God. In room 312, a small boy lay still beneath the hum of machines. Tyler Williams, 8 years old, his skin pale as candle wax, his body sinking deeper into the hospital bed that had become his world. His mother, Sarah, sat beside him, exhausted, her hands wrapped around the tiny fingers that once held crayons and toy cars. Now those same fingers were cold and unmoving. A rosary dangled from Sarah's trembling hand, old, worn, the silver cross dull with time. Her lips moved without sound. Words had long ago turned into tears, and tears had turned into silence. The heart monitor beeped unevenly. Dr. Robert Miller, a man who had seen far too many nights like this, entered quietly, checking the charts. He didn't have to say it aloud. Sarah already saw it in his eyes. Tyler was losing his fight. "His vitals are dropping again," the nurse whispered. Dr. Miller nodded, his jaw tightening. "We'll do what we can. Keep him comfortable." He hesitated, then placed a hand on Sarah's shoulder. "Mrs. Williams, I'm so sorry." Sarah didn't answer. She just kept her eyes on her son, as if sheer willpower might tether him to the world. Outside the window, lightning illuminated the night, white, fleeting, merciless. It had been 3 months since the diagnosis. Acute bacterial meningitis. 3 months of tests, antibiotics, fevers that broke and returned like waves. Every day was a battle. Every night another prayer unanswered. At 1:47 a.m., the machines let out another long, low warning tone. Sarah's head jerked up, her pulse racing. Nurses rushed in, the room erupting in movement. Cables, syringes, oxygen masks. Dr. Miller gave rapid instructions, his voice clipped, controlled, the voice of a man fighting the inevitable. Minutes stretched like hours, then silence again. The machine steadied. Tyler was alive, barely. Sarah leaned over him, tears wetting his pillow. "Please, Lord, don't take him from me. I don't care what happens to me, but please, not my boy." The clock struck 2 a.m. And that was when it happened. The hum of the monitors dimmed as if swallowed by a deeper silence. The storm outside seemed to pause mid-breath, and Sarah felt, no, she knew. Someone else was in the room. The air changed, warmer, fragrant, like roses blooming in the dead of winter. Sarah looked up, startled. Tyler's chest rose slowly, his eyelids fluttering open for the first time in days. His voice, weak but certain, broke the stillness. "Mum, there's a lady here." Sarah froze. "What, sweetheart?" He smiled faintly. "She's standing by the light. She's wearing blue, and she's smiling at me." Sarah turned, heart pounding, but there was no one. Only the sterile hospital room bathed in the dim glow of machines. She glanced at the doorway, empty. The nurses hadn't come back in. When she looked at Tyler again, he was still staring past her shoulder, peaceful, unafraid. His little hand reached out, as if touching something unseen. "She says, 'Don't cry, Mommy.' She says everything's going to be okay." Sarah's breath caught in her throat. For the first time in months, her tears were not born of despair, but from something deeper, older, sacred. At that exact moment, the faint aroma of roses thickened in the air, drifting toward the heart monitor. And then, Impossibly. The steady beat began to climb, soft, rhythmic, alive. Sarah fell to her knees, clutching her rosary to her chest. Thank you. Oh, thank you. The room returned to its normal hum. The storm outside began again. But nothing was the same. At 2:03 a.m., the first trace of a miracle had entered room 312. Quiet, unseen, and entirely real. Morning crept slowly over Dallas, spreading a pale golden light through the hospital's long glass windows. The rain had passed, leaving the world washed clean, though the scent of damp earth still lingered in the air. In room 312, Sarah hadn't slept a minute. She sat motionless in the chair beside her son's bed, her rosary still wrapped tightly around her fingers, as if letting go might undo whatever miracle had begun in the night. Tyler was breathing steadily now, not the shallow, uneven gasps that had haunted her for weeks, but deep, rhythmic breaths. His color had returned, a faint flush warming his cheeks. The boy who'd been fading away had somehow found his way back. When Dr. Miller entered that morning, he stopped in the doorway. "What on earth?" he murmured. The chart in his hand almost slipped from his fingers. Every indicator, oxygen saturation, heart rate, temperature, had stabilized. It didn't make sense. He ran the numbers twice, then a third time. The results were the same. This shouldn't be possible," he whispered. Sarah rose slowly, her voice trembling. "Doctor, he woke up last night. He spoke to me." Dr. Miller blinked, still staring at the monitor. "He spoke?" She nodded, her eyes glistening. "He said there was a woman in the room, dressed in blue, and the moment he said it, everything changed. The machines, his breathing, even the air." Dr. Miller turned to look at her, the way a man of science looks at something that both frightens and fascinates him. "Mrs. Williams," he said gently, "I think you were exhausted, under stress. It's not uncommon for people to—" But before he could finish, Nurse Rebecca Carter stepped in. Her face was pale, her eyes wide. "Doctor, you should see this." They followed her down the hall to the nurse's station, where the security monitor flickered with black and white footage of room 312. The timestamp read 2 a.m. The camera captured Sarah kneeling by the bed, her head bowed, her lips moving in prayer. But at the edge of the frame, near the window, there was something. A faint shimmer, a white shape, barely visible like light moving through mist. Dr. Miller frowned and leaned closer. "Could be a reflection," he said, though his voice lacked conviction. Rebecca didn't look away from the screen. "That's what we thought last year," she said quietly, "when it happened in room 310. Sarah turned to her. "What do you mean?" The nurse hesitated, lowering her voice. "Another patient, a little girl with heart failure. Her mother said she saw a woman in blue by her bedside the night before she recovered." Dr. Miller shot her a sharp look. "Rebecca!" But the nurse didn't back down. "I'm just saying, sir, there are things this hospital's cameras can't explain." That evening, Sarah stayed in the room again. The sun had set behind the city skyline, and shadows stretched long across the floor. Tyler was awake, his eyes bright, though his body still weak. "Do you remember what happened last night, sweetheart?" asked Sarah softly. Tyler nodded. "She was here again, Mom." Sarah froze. "Again?" He smiled faintly. "When you fell asleep, she came back. She stood by the window and talked to me." "What did she say?" His gaze drifted toward the corner of the room as though searching for words that were too big for him. "He said, I'm not supposed to be scared, and that you should pray for those who don't believe." Sarah's throat tightened. "What else?" He looked back at her, his voice barely a whisper. "He said she'll come again, but not just for me." Later that night, as Sarah stepped into the corridor to breathe, Nurse Rebecca approached her with a small smile. "You should get some rest," she said. "I can't," Sarah replied.
If I fall asleep, I'll miss her." Rebecca hesitated. "Mrs. Williams, may I tell you something?" Sarah nodded. "There's a small courtyard beneath this wing," she said softly. "Most people don't know it's there anymore, but years ago, before they expanded the hospital, there was a garden with a statue of the Virgin Mary in blue, the same one Dr. Miller's father helped install." Sarah blinked. "The Virgin Mary?" "Yes, the garden is still there, just below your son's room. We call it the chapel garden. Sometimes at night, nurses swear they smell roses when the windows are open." A chill ran through Sarah, though the hallway was warm. "You think—" Rebecca smiled gently. "I don't think, Mrs. Williams. I believe." When Sarah returned to the room, Tyler was already asleep. The faint hospital light glowed softly across his face. She sat back down, clasping her rosary, her eyes fixed on the little window above the bed. Outside, the moon hung low, wrapped in a haze of silver. For a moment, she thought she saw something, a shimmer, a gentle blue hue gliding past the glass. It was so subtle she could have imagined it. Then the air shifted again. The scent of roses, sweet, clean, alive. Sarah bowed her head, trembling. The storm of doubt in her heart began to quiet, and for the first time in months, she whispered not a plea, but a prayer of gratitude. "Thank you, Mother."
By morning, the hospital was quieter than usual. The corridors echoed with the faint squeak of wheels and the distant rhythm of heart monitors. But in room 312, there was something different, something lighter. The nurses said they could feel it before they even entered the room. The air was softer, the light warmer. It was as if the entire ward had taken a breath of grace. Dr. Miller stood at the foot of Tyler's bed, studying the boy's latest test results. "Remarkable," he muttered, his brows furrowed in disbelief. "His white blood cell count has normalized. His fever's completely gone. He shouldn't be recovering this fast." Sarah, seated by the window, looked up slowly. "But he is recovering, isn't he?" "Yes," the doctor admitted, closing the file. "But this doesn't make sense." Nurse Rebecca, who had been checking the IV line, gave a small smile. "Maybe it doesn't have to, Doctor." Dr. Miller shot her a look. "Medicine doesn't work on faith, Rebecca." "Maybe not, but faith sometimes works where medicine can't." He had no answer for that. That afternoon, sunlight spilled through the half-open blinds, painting golden stripes across the floor. Tyler was sitting upright for the first time in weeks, his small hands clutching a toy airplane. His voice was stronger now, but his eyes had changed. There was a calmness there, a serenity that didn't belong to an 8-year-old boy who had stared death in the face. He was talking quietly to Sarah, describing what he had seen. "He had a blue veil," he said, his eyes distant. "It shimmered like water, and her voice sounded like music, but not the kind you hear on TV, more like light." Sarah listened, her heart caught between wonder and disbelief. "Did she say anything to you this time?" Tyler nodded. "She said I should pray for the ones who don't believe yet, and she said she'll come again, but not for me, but for others too." When Dr. Miller came in later, Sarah hesitated before speaking. "Doctor, do you know about the garden beneath this building?" He looked puzzled. "The courtyard?" "Barely. It's been closed off for years. Why?" Nurse Rebecca stepped closer, lowering her voice. "I told her about it, sir. About the statue." Dr. Miller sighed. "Rebecca, please." "Just listen," Sarah interrupted softly. "My son's room. It's right above that statue, isn't it?" He paused, uneasy. "Yes, that's true." "Then maybe," she said, voice trembling, "that's not a coincidence." Curiosity, and something else he couldn't name, led Dr. Miller down to the lower level that evening. The hallway was dim and quiet, the kind of silence that invites reflection. At the end of the corridor, through a narrow glass door, he found it, the forgotten courtyard. The place was smaller than he imagined, half swallowed by ivy and neglect,
But in the center, surrounded by cracked tiles and overgrown roses, stood a statue of the Virgin Mary, her robe painted in a soft sky blue. One hand rested over her heart, the other extended outward as if in welcome. Despite the years, her face still seemed luminous in the fading light. Dr. Miller approached slowly. The scent of roses was faint but unmistakable, too strong for a garden that hadn't been tended in decades. He felt the air around him stir, a breeze that shouldn't have existed in that closed space. For a moment, he thought he heard something, faint, melodic, like the echo of a distant hymn. He stepped back, heart pounding, and whispered under his breath, "It's just the wind." But even as he said it, he didn't believe himself. Back upstairs, Tyler was sitting up, coloring with a borrowed set of crayons. He drew what looked like a woman surrounded by light. "That's her," he told Rebecca when she came in. "That's the lady who smells like flowers." Rebecca knelt beside the bed, studying the picture. "She's beautiful," she said softly. Tyler nodded. "She said she likes when people smile, even when it hurts." The nurse swallowed hard. She'd heard stories before, whispers of children who saw things adults couldn't, but this was different. There was no fear in the boy's eyes, no confusion, only peace. That night, as the clock neared midnight, the hospital began to settle. Machines hummed, doors clicked shut, and footsteps faded down the hallways. In room 312, the small lamp by Tyler's bed flickered once, then steadied. Sarah was half asleep in her chair when a soft fragrance began to fill the room. Roses again, stronger than before, mingled with the faint sound of something, like singing. Her eyes fluttered open and she gasped. The room wasn't empty. There, beside her son's bed, stood a gentle light, faint, blue, alive. It didn't have form at first, only presence. But as Sarah's vision cleared, she saw it. The outline of a woman draped in azure, her hands outstretched in blessing. The light pulsed softly, like a heartbeat. "Who are you?" she whispered, tears filling her eyes. There was no sound, but a warmth spread through her chest, words unspoken, but understood. "Do not be afraid. He is healed." Sarah fell to her knees, unable to speak. When she looked up again, the light had faded. Only the lingering scent of roses remained in the air like a final promise. And in that silence, the monitor beside Tyler's bed beeped stronger, steadier, brighter than ever before. Somewhere below them, in the courtyard garden, a single rose, long dead and dry, began to bloom again.
The next morning, the hospital buzzed with quiet disbelief. Word had spread, not officially, not in any medical report, but through whispers that traveled faster than truth itself. The boy in room 312, the one everyone thought wouldn't make it through the week, was now sitting up, laughing, eating breakfast. Nurses peeked in on pretexts, refilling water, checking vitals, adjusting sheets, but really, they came to see it with their own eyes. Tyler's skin had regained its color, his strength had returned, and even his voice carried the soft, unshakable tone of someone who had seen something sacred and survived to tell it. Dr. Miller stood by the doorway, his arms folded tightly, a medical chart in one hand as though gripping data could steady him against what his heart was beginning to accept. He had no explanation, no chart, no graph, no theory that could fit what was happening before him. "Your son's recovery is astonishing," he told Sarah at last, trying to sound detached. "His infection is gone. There's not a trace of inflammation left." Sarah smiled faintly. "You said that wasn't possible." He exhaled. "It isn't." She looked at him then, not with triumph, but quiet certainty. Then maybe it's not science that's keeping him alive. That evening, Dr. Miller found himself unable to go home. Long after his shift ended, he walked the halls of St. Joseph in silence. He passed rooms where families prayed, where machines breathed for those who couldn't, and he realized how often he'd turned away from their faith,
choosing logic over mystery. He ended up in the courtyard again, where the air felt thicker, almost reverent. The statue of the Virgin stood as it always had, her expression serene, her blue robes untouched by time. But something about the place felt different. He sat on a nearby bench, rubbing his forehead. I'm losing it. I'm seeing patterns that aren't there. Then a faint breeze stirred the roses. He looked up. The flowers, the ones that had been dry and brittle for months, were blooming again. Pale pinks and deep reds, vibrant against the gray stone. Dr. Miller's breath caught. He stood, stepping closer. On the pedestal below the statue, carved into the marble, he noticed words he'd never read before, worn by time, almost invisible in the dim light. For those who have lost faith, I wait beneath your sorrow. He stared at the inscription for a long time. The hum of the city faded. Somewhere far above him, in room 312, the boy slept peacefully. The next day, Tyler was released from intensive care. As Sarah guided her son through the hallway, nurses and orderlies stopped to smile, to wave, to whisper blessings. Everyone in the building seemed to feel it, not just relief, but awe. Before leaving, Tyler tugged at his mother's sleeve. Can we go see her? Who, sweetheart? The lady in blue, he said softly. She said she's waiting in the garden. Sarah exchanged a glance with Rebecca, who was standing nearby. The nurse smiled, eyes glistening. Come on, she said. I'll take you. They made their way down to the courtyard, sunlight streaming through the stairwell. The air was thick with the scent of roses, not perfume, not artificial, but real, living fragrance. When they stepped into the open space, Tyler froze. His small hand tightened around his mother's. That's her, he whispered, his voice trembling, not with fear, but recognition. That's the lady who came to me. Rebecca covered her mouth, her eyes filling with tears. Sarah kneeled beside him, her own heart pounding. Are you sure? Tyler nodded. She had that same blue robe, and her hands were like that, one over her heart. He pointed to the statue, his voice softening. She said she'd come again for others too. The three of them stood in silence. A breeze passed through, cool and light, carrying the scent of roses across the courtyard. Then, as if touched by invisible hands, the flowers surrounding the statue bent gently toward Tyler, bowing almost. And in that instant, sunlight broke through the clouds, flooding the garden in gold. Sarah pressed her hands to her mouth, overcome. Rebecca crossed herself, whispering a prayer. And Dr. Miller, who had quietly followed them, though he didn't know why, stopped just inside the doorway. The light glimmered on the marble face of the Virgin, illuminating her features as though she were alive. For a brief, breathtaking moment, he could have sworn she turned her gaze toward him. He stood frozen, unable to breathe. Then Tyler looked up at him and smiled. It's okay, doctor. You don't have to see to believe. That night, long after the Williams family had left, Dr. Miller returned to the courtyard one last time. He stood before the statue, staring up into the serene, carved face. I don't know if I believe, he whispered, but thank you. The wind stirred again, brushing past his coat. He thought he heard something, a soft murmur, almost like a mother's lullaby, fading into the distance. For the first time in years, he closed his eyes and bowed his head. The next morning, when the cleaning staff entered the courtyard, they found something strange at the foot of the statue, a single white rose, still fresh, glistening with dew. And no one could explain how it got there.
Weeks passed, and what had begun as a whisper in the sterile halls of St. Joseph Hospital became something more, a story that refused to fade. It spread quietly, from one nurse to another, from a patient's family to a parish across town.
until it found its way into churches, newspapers, and whispered prayers. People began referring to it simply as the miracle of Tyler. But for those who had been there, for Sarah, for Rebecca, and even for Dr. Miller, it wasn't just a story, it was a change. The hospital administration at first tried to downplay it. Coincidence, they said, an unexpected remission. Yet they couldn't deny what followed. Within weeks, other patients began to recover inexplicably. A man who'd suffered from terminal pneumonia suddenly regained breath. A young mother with sepsis walked out of the ICU. And strangely, every one of those patients had been assigned to rooms overlooking the old courtyard garden, the one where the Virgin Mary in blue had stood forgotten for decades. Rebecca Carter kept quiet about it publicly, but in private, she began leaving fresh roses at the base of the statue each morning before her shift. She wasn't the only one. Families who had lost loved ones, staff who had struggled through endless nights of pain and fatigue, they all began to stop by the courtyard, whispering prayers they hadn't dared to say before. Soon, the garden was given a new name, the Garden of the Blue Lady. For Sarah Williams, life after the miracle was both simple and profound. Tyler grew stronger by the day. The boy who once lay breathless beneath white sheets now ran through their backyard, laughing, his voice ringing like bells. Every evening before bed, he would kneel at his small table, close his eyes, and pray. "Thank you for visiting me, Mother. Please bless the sick children tonight." Sometimes, Sarah would stand quietly at the door listening, tears of gratitude softening her smile. She no longer prayed out of fear. She prayed out of love. One Sunday morning, she returned to the hospital with Tyler. The garden had changed, the weeds cleared, new flowers planted, and a small plaque installed at the statue's base. It read, "Dedicated to Our Lady of the Healing Rose, who comforts the suffering and restores hope." Sarah knelt beside her son and whispered, "Do you remember her words?" Tyler nodded solemnly. "She said she'd come again, for others too." Inside the hospital chapel, Dr. Robert Miller sat in the last pew, staring at the flickering red candle near the tabernacle. His hands were clasped, not quite in prayer, at least not the way he'd been taught as a boy. He had been raised Catholic once upon a time, long ago, but somewhere between medical school, loss, and the endless fight to keep death at bay, he had stopped believing. Or perhaps, as he often told himself, he had simply grown up. Yet now, sitting there in silence, the scent of roses seemed to follow him even here. It clung faintly to his coat, to the memory of a boy who should have died but didn't, and to the light he had seen in the courtyard, the light he could still see every time he closed his eyes. He bowed his head at last. "I don't know how to pray anymore, but if you're there, thank you for reminding me that I'm not God." The candle flickered once, as though stirred by breath. Months later, the Garden of the Blue Lady became a small pilgrimage site. Not a grand shrine, not a spectacle, but a place of quiet miracles. Families came to light candles, patients left notes of gratitude, and sometimes, when the wind was still, the faint scent of roses would drift through the air, even in the dead of winter. The hospital didn't advertise it. They didn't need to. Because those who came didn't come for curiosity. They came because they heard of a woman in blue, a mother who appeared where suffering was greatest and where hope was nearly gone. On the first anniversary of his recovery, Tyler stood once more before the statue. He placed a small bouquet of white roses at her feet, His mother knelt beside him, whispering a prayer. When they finished, Tyler looked up and said, "Mom, do you think she's still here?" Sarah smiled, touching his cheek. "She's always here, sweetheart. Just because we can't see her doesn't mean she's gone." Tyler looked thoughtful for a moment, then turned back to the statue. "I think she's visiting someone else tonight, someone who needs her more." As the sun dipped behind the hospital, painting the courtyard in hues of gold and rose, a nurse hurried past the open windows of room 310, now occupied by a new patient, a young girl struggling for her life. The nurse paused suddenly. A fragrance, sweet, delicate, familiar, lingered in the air. She looked around. There was no one there. But in that quiet, she could have sworn she heard a whisper. "Do not be afraid." She turned toward the window. Outside, the roses below the statue swayed gently, though there was no wind. And as the screen of the story fades to black, the narrator's voice returns, calm, reverent, steady. The miracle of Tyler was not just about one child's healing. It was about faith reborn in a world that had forgotten how to believe. Sometimes heaven speaks not through thunder or visions, but through the scent of roses, the kindness of a stranger, or a whisper in the dark that says, "You are not alone." A soft hymn rises, faint, distant, like the echo of prayer. If you believe in the power of the Virgin Mary's intercession, the voice continues gently, leave a prayer in the comments below and tell us where you're watching from. Because miracles, true miracles, are not bound by time or place. They happen wherever there is faith. The sound fades into silence, leaving only the memory of roses in the air.